Hi, this is praios, and I used to be a professional gambler, and yeah, nowadays I mainly make YouTube content, more or less. And yeah, today we want to listen to a video of Phil Galfond. This is apparently about tournament maniacs, and the title is "Why Do Maniacs Always Have Big Stakes in Poker Tournaments?" Don't know yet why this video is 9 minutes, but I think the answer to it is very easy. We don't. Most of them bust very early and very fast. But, like whatever, a small percentage, like 1 out of 10 or something, will get lucky and build a massive stack. And that's also the nature of things, because people will very soon and fast recognize that this guy is a lunatic and completely crazy, and then they will make adjustments, call down lighter and stuff. And yeah, when these dudes get lucky or hit hands, they will build a massive stack. That's natural, but most of them have a very short life and will end up busting very early, but some or very few will get lucky. And I think the same is also true for all sort of games, not only tourneys and cash games. That's true too. I mean, the maniac will usually lose his money very fast, but occasionally they will also have crazy sessions where they get lucky and build a huge stack. So let's see what Phil Galfond has to say. By the way, thank you for this video, and let's now, without further ado, let's get into it. As I said, don't know why it's 9 minutes, because I had it covered in one.
Hey everybody, Phil here. So I made a video on how to adjust to Maniacs, and specifically I talked about 3 different types of Maniacs and how I would adjust my play. Now I'm not going to go through all of that once again, but you can check out the video if that sounds interesting to you. Today's video is going to be about it.
I commented on that too, so you can check out my thoughts on this as well. I think you also had a kind of crazy understanding of Maniacs, a different one than I was used to.
A question that was in response to that video. Do you think a Maniac style works well at low stakes tournaments, at other tournaments? Because I see these players accumulating chips quite often. First of all, I'll talk about why you have to be careful about observing evidence and drawing conclusions from it. And then I'll talk about kind of Maniac style of play and the pros and cons. And
this is called survivorship bias, by the way. So the survivorship bias means that you only see the guys with the huge stack. All the other ones did already bust. So yeah, that's definitely a mistake of yours. You just don't get things right.
And actually at the end, I want to talk through a tip of how you can get yourself to play a little bit more aggressively if it's something that's uncomfortable for you.
Huge spider
which is somewhere I've been myself. There are a lot of different elements of this. I really like this question because there are different elements of it. So the first element that I want to address is variance. So we all see very loose aggressive players build big stacks in tournaments. And we actually very often see them go deep in tournaments or win tournaments. This does not mean that it's a profitable style. It also doesn't mean that it's not. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that a super tight style is not going to accumulate a big stack in the early stages of a tournament. It's essentially impossible. So if we have a 100-person tournament and 50 players are playing extremely tight and 50 players are maniacs, at the end of day one, almost all the big stacks are going to be maniacs. And it doesn't mean they're better than the tight players. It just means that you don't get all of your chips in all the time if you're super tight. It's important to keep that in mind, because we may have biases towards seeing something that's supposed to happen randomly to certain types of players.
We'll get this thing occasionally. Hi. Any recommendations what to do against huge spiders that show up occasionally and then disappear, like on my desk that isn't very good organized and it's in front of the screen and then it's behind it and very tilting. But yeah, back to topic.
And assuming that means that they're doing something right. Now, All of that said, I do think that tournaments, especially low stakes tournaments or generally softer tournaments, players who play very aggressively in these tournaments tend to do well. The reason for that is I think the average player plays too tight and too passive against these styles. So what ends up...
Yeah, that could also be a reason. People being able to build huge stacks because people are too scared money to stack off relative light against them, and their style can work. Or it can also work very good once someone is new to the table, even if people adjust, because at first people will think that this is a normal player, and over time they will just recognize that this guy is crazy. And at this point he might move tables again, and then he again plays against new people who don't know him, and yeah, that's also a reason why they might build huge stacks.
What's happening is these players open with too many hands, they don't get...
I'm also pretty sure that most of this is also true for cash games. If they change table and if they don't play a lot and are well known.
3-bet enough, so that's okay. They steal the blinds a little more than they should, so that works out well for them. They get to the flop, they bet. They don't get raised nearly enough. They get more folds than they should. You know, they're betting third pot on the flop, half pot on the turn, 80% pot on the river, and they're getting like 40% folds on the flop, and then 50% folds on the turn, and then 60% folds on the river. And actually each of those bets is profitable with any 2 cards. Oversimplified, but basically that's it. So I think the style...
It sounds like Phil basically is recommending to play like a maniac. Because yeah, if they fold that high of a number, then it's very profitable to be a maniac. And I don't think that's necessarily true if people adjust and play well as well. So yeah, against good players, this style definitely is, yeah, your recipe to failing.
It works really well against, well, your average player in a smaller stakes tournament, because kind of the mentality. First of all, it's hard to make a hand in Holdem. And especially in those like late position open spots where you have to defend your blinds with more hands than some people are comfortable with. Either they overfold pre-flop, which works out well for the Maniac, or they defend with some of those hands that should, but not 3-bet enough. They never 3-bet enough. And then they check fold the flop because they whiffed, or they call with middle pair and then they call the turn because this guy's a Maniac. But then when they fire the last barrel on the river, they're like, I just don't want to risk this much money, and they fold. A lot of the way people play tournaments is that they're, as opposed to a cash game.
Yeah, that's also that's another fish, but another different type of fish. I mean, if you know that this guy's a maniac and that you will face 3 barrels very often, you have to make some decisions on the flop already. I mean, when you call, you have to often call twice again, basically.
I mean, people play fearfully in cash games too, but in a cash game, you can always rebuy. And in tournaments, you have 1 tournament life, unless it's a re-entry. But even in that case, people don't like busting out of tournaments. They don't like risking large percentages of their stack. And so there are so many spots that come up where I think that you'll have somebody who's folding something like...
Yeah, many people play very snug and nitty in turn ace. I think that's also not the optimal strategy. And yeah, against these dudes, Maniac style works very well.
80% of their range to a pot bet, making a bluff very profitable with any 2 cards. So these Maniacs find themselves in spots where they just get to make a lot of these profitable bluffs on flop, on turn, on river, hand after hand, and they just accumulate chips. And then actually what works super well...
I think there are also some very well-known players but not necessarily are that familiar with, how is it called, the ECM model, but we have very great success in turn ace. Doc Polk, I think, is one example. He's always playing very aggressive, but he's using his brain and does it selectively. And yeah, I think that's one of the reasons. Although he's not an ICM expert, he's doing very well in turn ace because he's using aggression very well and against the right people.
Well, for them is that if they're a good Maniac, if they're smart and they're good at hand reading, they've made all these plays, they've picked up chips here and there again and again, and they have this image of a Maniac. And now they enter a pot, and it's clear that somebody else likes their hand, but actually the Maniac has a really good hand. Well, now the Maniac can get paid off. If they have a good feeling that their opponent has something pretty good.
Yeah, image also sometimes helps. I mean, even Maniacs make hands sometimes, and yeah, then they get paid off more often than a normal player does.
They'll stop with their bluffs, but when they have a big hand, they'll keep betting, and they get paid off really big because they've kind of earned that through their image. So I think a really loose aggressive style does work well in tournaments. Specifically, the aggressive part. I think, you know, the tougher your competition gets, the more punished you get by playing super loose, because they're not going to make such big mistakes that you can make up for it. That you can make up for playing, you know, 7-4 suited, raising under the gun. So I would say relentless aggression with reasonable opening ranges is going to work well in a lot of mid-stakes tournaments. In a lot of small stakes tournaments, relentless aggression that is
I think in small stakes it's probably working less well because people often you have like this loose passive calling tape station type of player, and they just call down, and then it's not working well. But let's say what Phil thinks.
Even a little less intelligent, I think, will work pretty well. But you do have to be ready to fold when people who are generally playing scared start playing back at you.
Okay,
and that's why actually the way to adjust these players is you actually have to 3-bet more. You have to check raise bluff the flop. You have to do some things.
Yeah, I'm also by no means a tournament expert. I don't play tournaments at all because I hate this long hours. I mean, often you play for hours and bust on the bubble and get no money, and it's very frustrating. And you also have to play very long hours consecutively. I mean, not taking into account the breaks, but if you do well, you have to do whatever 10-hour at once, and I really hate that because my sessions are way shorter, and I want to be able to quit when I want to quit. And it also sucks when you have to start with, like, let's say 8 tournaments, and then you bust in all but 2, and then you get very bored in the end, and add cash game tables when you are at your B game only and stuff. So this is also very expensive stuff that could happen. I mean, at least it happened to me. Another reason why I don't like tournaments much.
To combat their aggression. Otherwise, you know, if you just call down appropriately, they're not actually even losing to that. They're just breaking even on their bluffs, essentially. So, yeah, in short, just because you see somebody accumulate a lot of chips, or you see a certain player type accumulate a lot of chips, doesn't mean that the way they're playing is correct.
Survivorship bias, we learned that before.
It could just be that, you know, high variance players accumulate big stacks. But that said, I do think in a lot of non-expert fields, the very loose aggressive style works super well. The other reason that even in tougher fields,
not sure if it's working that well. He might also be biased because, yeah, you see this guys having huge stacks all the time, but you don't see all the 9 out of 10 other idiots who busted very early.
I would err on the side of preferring somebody play aggressively and too loose, is because playing too loose and too aggressively is usually not going to cost you that much in a tournament, unless you're against really tough players. But playing too tight, and especially too passively, is going to cost a lot of EV.
Yeah, I think loose passive, not showing much aggression, but calling station type of player are the worst players ever, and they probably also lose the most, and they are also the most easiest to play against. Every other style is better.
If you put 100 players in a tournament and you put 2 bad players in, like, I know they're bad, they don't really understand poker, but one of them is just super aggressive and one of them is just super passive, the passive player essentially has 0 chance to win the tournament of 100, like probably literally 0.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's basically what I said. Well,
to win a 100 player tournament, depending on how passive they are. The aggressive player actually has a chance, even if they're worse than the average player. They have a real chance to win, and that's, you know, all the money is made at the later stages of the tournament, where wielding a big stack adds a lot of EV, and so accumulating a big stack adds a lot of EV, and taking advantage of people who overfold, which is the more common leak.
It's also way tougher to play against a guy who is over aggressive compared to someone who's just passive, and once he gets active with bets and raises, you know that he basically has a very good hand and you have to be very careful. But against the Maniac, and this is even more true if he's a thinking Maniac, he will choose his spots well and don't necessarily follow through all the time. And he could have a good hand sometimes too. I mean, even very aggressive players make hands. And if he's on a good run and gets lucky a few times in a row, you will pay him off and you will lose all the money to him while you wouldn't lose it to another guy. So way, way, way tougher to play this aggressive dudes than the passive one.
Adds a lot of EV. So I would always take somebody.
Yeah, and also the big stack can push people around, and there are ICM considerations and shit. So it's definitely a huge advantage to have a big stack in certain stages of tournaments. At least that's my understanding of ICM. Again, not an expert.
On the more aggressive side in a tournament specifically. Whereas in a cash game, fear is kind of less of an issue. They're usually not antes, which actually is a massive factor here. Picking up antes is a huge part of tournament.
I mean, fear in cash games can also play a role. I mean, often recreational players get in games that they actually could not afford and they are obviously scared. And yeah, so I wouldn't say that fear does not play a role. Or if you build a massive stack and then you are up against another guy with also a massive stack and he's putting a lot of pressure, doing huge bets, and you don't want to lose the 1000 BB stack in front of you, then yeah, it's definitely tough and fear plays a role, even in cash game.
Play. If you played a tournament without antes, then it gets a little bit different in terms of who I'd prefer. One thing that I think can work well for people who are not naturally very aggressive, their natural poker style is not very aggressive, is to think of a player who you play with who is very aggressive. And when you go to play, just try this one session and try it at lower stakes than you like, try it in a game you're comfortable losing in. Just pretend that you're them and think when you look at your cards, what would they do with these cards? And just do that for an hour and see how it feels and see how you do. I think that's a really good way to get yourself out of your own head, essentially, and playing a style, because it's really tough to force.
Another theory, but I mean, I didn't make this up, but this would be very tough. Let's say there's a player who can play different styles and both are very well, and he mixes them like very well, and your opponent never knows which style he's playing. He can play loose aggressive and he can play tight aggressive, and yeah, and you never know which mode he is on. If you just use stats, you would adjust wrong against this guy because you will have an average, and it's never the average. He's either very tight or very loose aggressive. So against the average stats, you make a mistake, and yeah, you always have to wonder, okay, is this now the tight dude I'm facing, or is it the very aggressive one? I mean, it could be just two people changing seats at random times, and yeah, then it would be very hard to adjust it to such an opponent. Or it could be a guy who just can do both styles and throws a dice before the hand always, and then depending on the role, he will be very loose in his hand or very tight. And yeah, I think it would be hard to adjust to such a player. I mean, just a thought. I mean, obviously there's a GTO style and stuff, but yeah, people downplay GTO, and if it's an exploitative game where people play not correct all the time and not having all this theory stuff in their head, then this is very hard to adjust to. I mean, also, a lot of people adjust very badly against Maniacs. They just get very crazy and angry and sort of tilted and just think these dudes are insane all the time. while some are actually thinking, and then they stack off with whatever. King, King, XX in PLO, pre-flop for 400 BB, when the Maniac type guy is having aces. And yeah, if people adjust wrong, then this could be a very, very profitable style. I know a guy who has this style perfected, and he's not playing online, but he's playing some live games with not that big of a competition or not that good poker players in there. And they will constantly make very bad decisions against him because we basically assume he's bluffing all the time. Although this is just an impression that's clearly wrong. Okay, let's move on with the video.
Force yourself to play a style you're not used to. I think this is a nice little hack to get you a little bit closer to it or get you some experience playing in a style that you're not used to. Hopefully that answers your question. And for others.
Yeah, I think it's also a good idea to have all these styles in your arsenal, and depending on how the table plays, you should adjust your style. Against very tight, nitty opponents, you should probably play lag and get them to fold a lot of hands and accumulate chips. And if your table in general is very loose aggressive and does not like to fold, you should do the tight aggressive road. So yeah, depending on the playstyle of your opponent, you basically do the counter and use the style that's making you the most money.
Out there helps you plan a little bit more. It's important that you're comfortable with the style of poker you play. So I wouldn't urge you, if it's really unnatural to play super aggressively, you can try it maybe in smaller buy-ins and see how it feels and build up to it. But it's okay to play a style that's just tight and reasonably aggressive. However, if your natural state is just super, super passive play, which actually probably my natural state 15 years ago was something closer to that, you have to work on it because it's not gonna work well for tournaments. Good luck.
Okay, thanks for this video, Phil. Yeah, like, subscribe, share, all the good things. I definitely have to kill this spider now. Wish me luck. Bye until next time.